We are back talking about the implications of the release of the Twardy report, or a summary of the report. And that begs the question, and I asked you this earlier, what precludes Stan Twardy from releasing the entire report?
His client precludes that. It would be up to the client how much is released, and ordinarily that would be done in consultation with the lawyer. So Twardy presumably would have consulted with Donovan and said, these are our findings, this is what we think we should release. If there's something that shouldn't be released, they might decide to withhold it for certain reasons. But he would not be able to, go rogue against his client's interest and reveal, the investigation if Donovan didn't want him to do that.
We had asked during the press conference about whether there was a transcript of the interview of Chris Donovan, and he told us there was not. You were telling me that's normal. Yeah,
that's pretty much standard operating procedure in an internal investigation. Usually the lawyers try to write down as little as possible. There's always concerns about attorney-client privilege and when that's going to apply and when it might be waived. And so in order to make it so there's fewer documents to discover, they generally do take as few notes as possible, and they do not record interviews like that.
Interesting. How much does something like this cost? Chris Donovan doesn't have tons of money in his campaign coffers.
So I did notice that, Twardy today also said that he didn't know how much it would be, and this is going to be an expensive endeavor. Pretty much it sounds like people were working full-time on this over the past month. There was 9 attorneys involved. Day Pitney's a large law firm. Their billing rates are expensive. The attorneys who are working on this were likely billing in the range of $200, $300, $400 an hour. Earlier we did a little calculation ourselves, and we suspected that it could cost up to $250,000 for this report.
Wow. Who else could be implicated and charged in this?
So right now, only Braddock, as far as I know, has been charged, but it's a crime not only to receive funds that were put in someone else's name, but to allow yourself to be the conduit. And so therefore, the people who actually wrote the checks and received the cash, they could also be prosecuted. The people who went out and recruited those persons, they could be charged with conspiracy to violate federal election law. So there's a number of people that we could see being added in this investigation.
Based on the attorney-client privilege, I just wanted to be clear on what you said, that they purposely don't write much down. Are you saying that if the feds couldn't interview Donovan, that they could go after those attorneys' notes? In other words, if it came to that, and they could try to subpoena those notes and find out what Donovan told Twardy? Is that a possibility?
That would be very unlikely. I think if Twardy interviewed Donovan, there would certainly be an attorney-client privilege that attaches to that. When you're interviewing former employees, it gets to be a grayer area. So the former campaign aides who were interviewed in this investigation, whether the notes from those investigations are discoverable, that could be something that a judge might have to decide.
Okay, because they are not the client. And that's why it would possibly go outside the attorney-client privilege.
Yes, in simple terms.
Do you have any sort of historical context? Is this unusual for the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI to be doing an investigation of a candidate so close to the date of a primary without saying, we're looking into this, but this person is, innocent and we're not charging them?
Well, I don't think that it's the practice of the U.S. Attorney's Office to, come out and say someone's innocent before they've made that determination, or generally they don't make that determination. They decide this is not something that we're going to pursue. And, I'm not aware of too many, cases where this has happened, although, this election cycle is pretty hot. We have this going on with Donovan's campaign, and then we also have the Lisa Wilson Foley campaign, and what's happening with Roland, so this is the year for it.
Yeah, let's go ahead and talk about that and discuss what you might be thinking is the likely scope of that investigation.
So what we know is that Governor Roland was an unpaid volunteer for the Lisa Wilson Foley campaign, but at the same time he was receiving monthly payments from her husband in connection with a with his business Apple Rehab, that he was doing work for it. And so what they're probably investigating at this point is the scope of his involvement with Apple Rehab. What was his contract? What did it call for? Was he actually performing those services? Also, they're probably investigating the allegations of Mark Greenberg, who told the authorities that Governor Rowland offered to work on his campaign and be paid through a charity that Mark Greenberg owns. So that's what they're focusing on now, I'm sure.
And who would be implicated in that, or who could be implicated in that? What would they be charged with?
So if it turns out that Governor Rowland was, in essence, being paid to work on the campaign under the table by Apple Rehab, there's a number of ways that they could be charged. First, the campaign could be charged for violating reporting laws, that this would be an in-kind contribution of his services that were being paid for by a business, and so that is in essence a contribution to the campaign that was never reported. Also, the amount of the contribution. I understand that Governor Rowland received $30,000 for his work for Apple Rehab. That amount of money exceeds what an individual can donate. The current cap is $7,500, so that would be a violation to accept in excess of that. And lastly, Apple Rehab is not permitted under federal election law to make a donation to the campaign, and so therefore by accepting a donation from Apple Rehab, the campaign could be charged with violating that law.
A lot going on there. You know, the talk about payment and all brings up another thing I wanted to get back to, the Twardy report and the fee. We were talking about how much it might be, and you made a good point that they can't give a discount or anything.
No, I don't think they can. You know, we just talked about in-kind contributions. If Dave Pitney were to write off a substantial portion of the bill, in essence, they would be giving an in-kind donation to the Donovan campaign, which would not be permitted.
Right, interesting. Any last questions?
Right, but also, right, they can't do that up front, but as far as when Donovan will pay them is a different story, correct? In other words, if he doesn't have that large six-figure amount is what you're talking about, if he doesn't have that in his coffers, or he'd rather spend it on television commercials, I assume that's a different question.
Sure. I mean, there's plenty of campaigns that have gone into debt after they've concluded and remain in debt, and the bills never get paid. So.
All right. Well, we've talked about it a lot, and I really appreciate your expertise. Thanks, Michael, for being here, and thanks to all of you. You guys are going to stick around. Up next, Lisa Wilson-Foley is here. We're going to get her reaction to the Twardy report, the Rowland trouble, and a lot on the health care decision.